I'm joined today by Ministers Blair, LeBlanc, and Anand, as well as ministers from regions affected by the storm. Hurricane Fiona is currently having a terrible impact across Atlantic Canada and eastern Quebec. We're seeing devastating images come out of Puerto Basque. PEI has experienced storm damage like they've never seen. Cape Breton is being hit hard too, as is Quebec. There have been evacuation orders issued. Hundreds of thousands of people are without power. There are reports of roads washed out and homes destroyed. We've all seen the images. This is a very powerful and dangerous storm. We're thinking first and foremost of the people who've had a terrifying past 12 hours. People who've seen their homes washed away, seen the winds rip schools, roofs off. But as Canadians, as we always do in times of difficulty, we will be there for each other. Les Canadiens pensent à tous ceux qui sont touchés par l'ouragan Fiona, qui a des effets dévastateurs dans les provinces de l'Atlantique et dans l'est du Québec, particulièrement aux îles de la Madeleine. Il y a des gens qui voient leur maison détruite, des gens qui sont très inquiets. On va être là pour vous. On continue de suivre la situation de très près et, bien sûr, le gouvernement fédéral est là pour offrir du soutien aux provinces avec des ressources additionnelles. I will, of course, no longer be attending the state funeral in Japan, and our government is fully engaged in supporting Canadians through this major storm. I've spoken with Premiers Fury, King, Higgs, Houston, and Legault. I've told them that if there is anything the federal government can do to help, we will be there. Earlier today, I convened the Incident Response Group, and our government is standing ready to support provinces with any necessary resources. We've approved Nova Scotia's request for federal assistance and will deploy the Canadian Armed Forces to assist in assessment and cleanup and stand ready to do more. We're seeing reports of significant damage in the region, and recovery is going to be a big effort. We will be there to support every step of the way. I know Canadians across the country, as always, want to help, so we're announcing that we will match any Red Cross donations Canadians and corporations make over the next 30 days. Je sais que les Canadiens à travers le pays veulent aider, alors c'est pourquoi on va égaler les dons offerts à la Croix-Rouge canadienne pour l'ouragan Fiona pendant les 30 prochains jours. However, today and tomorrow, the situation remains very dangerous. Please stay safe, listen carefully to local authorities, and look out for each other. On voit déjà beaucoup de dommages et la situation reste critique aujourd'hui et demain. J'encourage tout le monde à continuer d'écouter les autorités locales et de faire tout ce qu'il faut pour rester en sécurité. Je vais maintenant passer la parole au ministre Blair. Bill.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, and bon après-midi tout le monde. Let me begin by joining the Prime Minister in expressing that our thoughts are with Canadians in Atlantic Canada and Quebec as they struggle through the impacts of Hurricane Fiona. At approximately 3:48 a.m. this morning, post-tropical storm Fiona made landfall between Canso and Guysborough, Nova Scotia. And as the storm tracked northward, with its high winds, its very heavy rainfall and storm surges, it has had a devastating impact across the Maritimes, Quebec, and Newfoundland, Labrador. The storm is not yet passed. It remains a dangerous storm. But as it's expected to track northwards today, it will lose strength and remain a post-tropical cyclone in the northeast corner of the Gulf of St. Lawrence by Sunday morning. And as we move from response to the storm into a period of recovery, I want to assure all Canadians and the Prime Minister that my colleagues and all of our officials right across the federal government, in every department and in every ministry, have been fully engaged in the response and will be there throughout the recovery. I've been in touch with my provincial counterparts, and our government's message is clear. Whatever you need, we will be there with you, we will be there for you, and we will deliver. I've also spoken with our Atlantic MPs and members of the opposition because we know that in an emergency, we are all on one team and we all must work together in the best interest of keeping Canadians safe. We are seeing severe damages to homes, critical public infrastructure, roads, and our airports. A significant number of trees are down right across the region. And we know the impacts of the power grid are still being assessed, but are in fact very extensive. We have heard from all of the provinces, and as they assess the damage, we anticipate that there will be several requests for federal assistance. We have been preparing and working with them and positioning our resources to mobilize over the past number of days as we followed Fiona's course so that we could move quickly when the requests came in. And as the Prime Minister earlier mentioned, today I and Minister Anand approved for federal assistance from the Government of Canada to the province of Nova Scotia. Canadian Armed Forces personnel will be deployed to assist with the debris removal and to restore transportation links. And Canadian Armed Forces aerial assets will be used to get a better sense of the damage. And if the costs of the recovery are too much for any province to bear, we have a program through the Disaster Financial Assistance Arrangement to provide federal funding to make it available to reimburse them for the costs that they may incur for the recovery. There are still many unknowns in this storm, and the recovery will take time. Right now, I would urge all Canadians to follow the advice that they're receiving from their local authorities. The most important imperative is to stay safe. And when the storm has passed, and it's safe to do so in your community, I'd like you to take the opportunity to check on your family, your neighbors, your friends, and your loved ones, in particular to those who may be living in vulnerable circumstances. Together, we will all get through this, and it is only by standing together and working together that we can respond and rebuild in a way that will restore the confidence of those who have been impacted by this terrible storm. God bless and Godspeed. And with that, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Minister LeBlanc.
Good afternoon. Bonjour. Thank you, Minister Blair. Thank you, Prime Minister. Comme a dit le ministre Blair, il y a encore beaucoup d'inconnus. J'ai communiqué aujourd'hui avec les 4 premiers ministres des provinces de l'Atlantique et mon homologue québécoise, et je leur ai exprimé notre soutien, et je demeurerai en contact avec eux au cours des prochaines heures et prochains jours. Nous serons là pour aider les régions touchées à se relever de cette catastrophe. We know the coming days will be difficult for many Atlantic Canadians and Quebecers, and we're here to assure them that the Government of Canada will be there with them every step of the way as the recovery effort begins. And I will remain in close contact with premiers over the coming hours and days. And I'll now pass the microphone to my colleague, the Minister of National Defence, Anita Anand.
Merci beaucoup, Dom et Bill, and thank you, Prime Minister. Good afternoon. I'm joining you from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Huron-Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee, and today we reaffirm our commitment to meaningful reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Over the past several hours, we have seen images of devastating impacts of Hurricane Fiona in Atlantic Canada and eastern Quebec. Fiona has wreaked havoc on homes and communities, blocking roads and tearing down infrastructure. And as a Nova Scotian myself, my thoughts are with you all. To everyone in Atlantic Canada and eastern Quebec, we are activating the necessary resources to help you. We will continue to stand with you. And I want to emphasize that even before we received a request for assistance, the Canadian Armed Forces had been preparing and mobilizing in case they were called upon to help. For example, the Canadian Armed Forces embedded liaison officers within provincial emergency management organizations in all 4 Atlantic provinces, first, to share information, and second, to ensure that there was a development of a common understanding of the situation. Et comme mes collègues l'ont souligné, le gouvernement fédéral a maintenant reçu une demande d'aide de la province de la Nouvelle-Écosse pour l'enlèvement des arbres et des débris, la reconnaissance aérienne et les tâches connexes. Furthermore, all 3 branches of the Canadian Armed Forces are preparing equipment and personnel. The Royal Canadian Navy ships HMCS Margaret Brooke and HMCS Goose Bay are in St. John's and ready to respond if necessary. In Halifax, the ready-duty ship remains available. The Navy is also preparing small boats to respond to inland flooding and one tug to support harbor operations if required. The Royal Canadian Air Force has CC-130 Hercules aircraft, CH-146 Griffin, CH-147 Chinook, and CH-148 Cyclones ready to respond. As always, search and rescue units are on standby and can be called upon to conduct operations at a moment's notice. The Canadian Army's Immediate Response Unit in Gagetown, New Brunswick, has increased its readiness to move at short notice and deploy if called upon. The Canadian Armed Forces are now commencing reconnaissance and preparing for preliminary moves to better understand where and what is required. And these Canadian Armed Forces members will come from the Immediate Response Unit in Gagetown with the possibility of additional members joining from local reserves and CFB Halifax. À mesure que la situation évolue, nous restons prêts à intervenir en Nouvelle-Écosse et dans les autres provinces qui pourraient avoir besoin de notre aide. Nous collaborons étroitement avec les provinces et d'autres partenaires et je promets à tous les Canadiens que nous ferons tout ce qui est en notre pouvoir pour vous aider. And as the situation evolves, we remain ready to respond in Nova Scotia and in other provinces that may need our help. We will continue to collaborate closely with provinces and other partners, and I promise all Canadians that we will always do whatever we can to help you. Nous remercions les membres des forces armées canadiennes et tous qui participent à ces efforts pour leur travail acharné et leur dévouement à l'égard de leurs concitoyens. This is an all-hands-on-deck effort, and I know that our Canadian Armed Forces will rise to the challenge, as they always do. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Okay. We will now take questions.
No, I believe we're passing it over to Minister O'Regan.
Minister O'Regan, you can proceed with your remarks.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I'll be brief. Here in St. John's, we have been spared much of Fiona's fury, but people here at the city's frozen. Everybody is watching TV. Everybody knows people in Port aux Basques. This is a community that's very familiar to people here, and the devastation that most of the country is seeing, we see here, and we take it to heart. I spoke with Mayor Brian Button earlier, as I know my colleague, Minister Hutchings, has, and he said there's a devastation there that they just haven't seen and couldn't even imagine. People there are used to having power outages, but it is quite another thing to lose your home, and he told me that there are at least 20 homes now that are lost. We are dealing closely with the provincial government. I've been speaking with the Premier, with the Justice and Public Safety Minister, as well as the Minister of Natural Resources, who's the member for that area. And they are all working on the ground, with people on the ground. What can I say other than we are working together the way that Canadians expect us to, the way that Newfoundlanders and Labradorians expect us to. I was down and visited HMCS Margaret Brooke, one of the Navy's newest vessels that's in the harbor today. You have a fine crew there and a brand new ship that I know would be ready and willing to help, as Minister Anand had suggested. We have seen each other through crises here in this province before, as we have in other parts of the country. And here I think of Hurricane Igor and of the great snowstorm back in 2020. We work together, hand in glove, all levels of government, to get things done for people who are in need right now, who are desperately in need. Thank you.
Thank you. Passing it now to Minister Hutchins.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Colleagues. As Minister Regan said, Eastern Canada communities, we're no stranger to the sea, and we know the force it can bring. But when I spoke to the local mayors yesterday to make sure they were prepared as they were, they said, we have another concern, that it's a full moon, and on a full moon you have higher tides. And they said that's going to make this just devastating, and they were correct. So our thoughts and prayers, as all my colleagues have said, go out to everyone impacted by this all throughout Eastern Canada. But remember, friends, as this travels along the coast of the island of Newfoundland and into Newfoundland and Labrador, please, please, please listen to the authorities. I really want to thank the first responders for their fast action today and thank them for the hard work they're going to have in the coming days and weeks. As Seamus said, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians always pull together, and by working together with all levels of government, we will support our communities and our residents as needed now and as we build back. I'll be in Port aux Basques tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing Mayor Button, Brian, myself. In the meantime, stay safe, everyone, and Godspeed.
Et maintenant, la ministre Leboutillier, ministre et député des îles et de l'île de la Madeleine et Gaspésie.
Merci, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Puis vraiment, je tiens à vous remercier d'être avec nous et nos populations pendant les périodes difficiles. Puis je tiens à souligner aussi la force et la résilience des Madelinots et des Madeliniennes qui sont des experts, je dois vous dire, dans la gestion des tempêtes. Puis ont vécu aussi Dorian il y a 3 ans passés. Puis je veux aussi prendre le temps de souligner tout le travail qui est fait par les maires, les préfets, puis à tous ceux qui ont travaillé pour garder les populations en sécurité pendant la tempête Fiona. Je peux vous dire que depuis mercredi, j'ai été en contact avec les gens du milieu, les gens des îles, puis avec mes collègues aussi, le ministre Blair, la ministre Annan, le ministre Algabra, le ministre Guilbeault. Puis je remercie tous mes collègues, tout le monde a mis l'épaule à la roue. Puis pour moi, c'est ce qui nous a amené la force de pouvoir passer à travers cette tempête. Actuellement, la tempête remonte vers le nord, donc on est dans le secteur de Sainte-Anne-des-Monts, puis se rend vers la Côte-Nord. Mais suite à son passage, il va falloir prendre connaissance des dommages, il va falloir travailler ensemble. Puis comme l'a souvent dit des gens d'expérience qui ont passé avant nous, ce qui ne nous tue pas nous rend plus forts. Puis en Gaspésie et aux îles, on est habitué d'avoir des tempêtes. Donc on va mettre tout le monde l'épaule à la roue, on va se serrer les coudes, puis on va travailler pour construire pour l'avenir. Merci.
Merci au Premier ministre, au ministre. Maintenant, nous allons passer à la période de questions en commençant par les questions dans la salle. Un rappel que nous avons 20 minutes avec le Premier ministre et ensuite 10 minutes avec les ministres. Tous ceux qui sont sur Zoom, si vous avez une question, veuillez utiliser la fonction main levée, s'il vous plaît. So we'll now go to questions, starting with questions in the room, then on Zoom. A reminder to use the raised hand function if you do have questions on Zoom, and a reminder that we have 20 minutes with the Prime Minister and then 10 minutes with the ministers. So we will start with Christian Pauslang from CBC.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Can you just clarify a bit when Canadians in Nova Scotia can expect the help that has been promised from the military? I've heard the details, but would like some more.
I can tell you that the work has already begun over the past number of days, knowing how serious Fiona could potentially be. We already put things in place, but I can turn to Minister Blair and Minister Anand for further detail on when things start to arrive on the ground.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I'll go first, if I may. As you indicated, we began mobilizing our resources. Canadian Armed Forces, the Canadian Coast Guard, Transport Canada have all been embedded in the provincial emergency operations centers and engaging with our provincial and local counterparts to make sure that we were prepared to respond and to work together. There's been conversations throughout the morning with provincial ministers and officials and coordination with Canadian Armed Forces and the Canadian Coast Guard in particular. And those resources are already mobilized and will be in place at the earliest opportunity. I believe that Nova Scotians will begin to see the presence of the Canadian Armed Forces very, very quickly, because we'll be working closely with Nova Scotia officials in debris removal and providing the supports and services that they ask for. And Anita, if you've got any further information on that, please share.
Thank you so much, Bill. Yes, we have been preparing even before we received a request for assistance. The Canadian Armed Forces have been preparing and mobilizing in case they're called upon to help. And so at this moment, the reconnaissance or recce is occurring to ensure that we deploy where and when as needed, and the situation is evolving, but the resources and the equipment are on the ground, and as soon as this recce is completed, the troops will be deployed to assist with the tree and debris removal and the restoring of transportation links and whatever else is required for as long as it takes. Thanks.
I wonder, Mr. Prime Minister, since you won't be attending a state funeral in Japan, if you or any of your ministers who are not currently already in the region are planning to visit the damaged areas.
I will be going to the damaged areas as soon as it is possible for me to do so. The last thing I want to do is displace any of the extraordinary emergency teams and authorities who are rightly focusing on everything needed on the ground. But I will be out there to see people and to demonstrate that all Canadians stand with them as quickly as is responsible.
Christian Noël, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Bonjour, Madame Leboutillier et les autres ministres aussi. Vous avez discuté avec les autres premiers ministres des provinces de tous ces dégâts-là, de ce qui s'est passé, de ce qui se passe avec les gens aussi qui vivent en Atlantique. De ces conversations, qu'est-ce qui ressort? Qu'est-ce que vous a marqué? Et quel est votre message aux gens de l'Atlantique?
Tout d'abord, je veux souligner à quel point tous les premiers ministres et tous les gens à travers ces provinces-là étaient conscients que ça s'en venait, que ça allait peut-être être vraiment une épisode terrible. Donc, les gens se sont préparés. Je pense que le fait que la réponse a été extrêmement rapide et les gens avaient vécu des tempêtes, pas tout à fait comme ça, mais des tempêtes graves au préalable, voulait dire qu'il y avait un haut niveau de préparation pour ça. Mais en même temps, ce qu'on remarque, c'est que les gens sont là pour s'entraider, pour aider leurs voisins. Nos premiers répondants sont là à faire du travail extraordinaire. Les équipes d'hydroélectricité sont là. Vraiment, il y a eu une mobilisation et une entraide. Tous les premiers ministres savent que le gouvernement fédéral est là, mais ont aussi des ressources assez importantes pour répondre aux besoins. Donc, c'est vraiment un travail d'équipe et on est là pour s'entraider parce que c'est ce que nous faisons en tant que Canadiens. Je sais que c'est des moments extrêmement difficiles pour bien des gens qui voient leur maison, leur propriété détruite, mais je sais aussi que les gens savent qu'ils sont pas seuls et que nous allons continuer d'être là pour eux.
On parle de plusieurs millions, peut-être milliards de dollars, notamment pour ce qui touche le fédéral, les infrastructures de télécommunications, les infrastructures portuaires, par exemple. Quelle est, en priorité, l'aide concrète que vous pouvez envoyer maintenant, qui est en route maintenant pour les premiers ministres, pour les gens qui sont là-bas? Et au niveau de l'argent, avez-vous une idée de à quoi ça pourrait ressembler?
Tout d'abord, nous sommes là pour aider avec les ressources nécessaires, que ce soit les forces armées, que ce soit de l'équipement spécialisé. On est en train de répondre pour ajouter aux effectifs que toutes les provinces ont déjà pour répondre à des situations comme cela. On est aussi en train, j'ai déjà eu des conversations avec les premiers ministres des provinces pour dire, il y en a qui ont soulevé le fait qu'il y a des gens qui ont des assurances qui vont peut-être pas couvrir cet aspect-ci. On va être là pour aider les gens. On sait que c'est un événement qui est venu frapper des gens très, très fort et on ne les laissera pas seuls. Le fédéral sera là avec des fonds. Les provinces vont être là avec des fonds. Pas une question de s'en préoccuper maintenant. Maintenant, c'est le moment de passer à travers ces prochaines 24 heures, d'être là les uns pour les autres, mais pendant les semaines, les mois et dans certains cas peut-être les années à venir, nous allons continuer d'être là les uns pour les autres.
Et vous avez vu les images, vous avez pensé à quoi quand vous avez vu ça?
Écoutez, je me souviens bien des inondations au Saguenay où on a vu des maisons partir, les images de Port-au-Basque, des maisons, les images de Chandler où des maisons sont en train de tomber dans l'océan. Tout ce à quoi on peut penser, c'est j'espère qu'il y a pas trop de gens qui sont blessés ou même enlevés. On doit être là d'abord pour les personnes, les maisons, ça se rebâtit, des communautés, ça va se rebâtir. On va être là pour ça, mais surtout il faut d'ici là que les gens restent en sécurité et en santé.
Vous pouvez juste répéter en anglais là-dessus, Monsieur Trudeau.
Obviously, as we see the images of houses falling into the sea, of waves destroying property and buildings, our first thought needs to be for people, to make sure that people are staying safe. Buildings and even communities can be rebuilt, but we have to make sure that we're keeping everyone safe. So as Minister Blair pointed out, as you're making sure that yourself and your loved ones are safe, think about in the coming hours and days, as it is safe, reaching out to people who may be vulnerable or alone. Canadians stand up for each other. We're there for each other. It's one of the incredible things about this country. And in times of distress and terror like this, where people are afraid for their lives, for their future, we need to be there for each other, and that's exactly what Canadians are going to be.
Okay, we'll go to questions on Zoom. A reminder to use the raise hand function if you do have a question. N'oubliez pas d'utiliser la fonction main levée pour me signifier que vous avez une question. Seeing there are no questions on Zoom, is there a question in person?
Certainement. Quand on parle des forces armées canadiennes, de quelle base, de quelle région, ils vont arriver quand, quel genre de matériel et quel genre d'aide ils vont offrir aux citoyens?
Tout d'abord, comme les ministres l'ont dit, il y a déjà des effectifs qui ont été mobilisés avant même que l'ouragan frappe, parce qu'on savait qu'il y allait avoir des besoins d'aide. Donc, il y a énormément d'effectifs actuellement sur place, mais dans les heures à venir, il va en avoir de plus en plus. Mais je vais tourner vers la ministre Anand pour donner plus de détails.
Oui, merci pour la question aussi. Les forces armées canadiennes commencent maintenant à effectuer des reconnaissances, comme j'ai dit, et à préparer des déplacements préliminaires afin de mieux comprendre où et quoi est nécessaire. Now, ces membres des forces armées canadiennes vont être là pour les provinces et ils vont venir de Gagetown avec la possibilité que d'autres membres se joignent à eux à partir des réserves locales et de la BFC Halifax. Mais maintenant, c'est le temps pour trouver, pour chercher l'information importante et après ça, de s'assurer que nous avons les personnels là pour les provinces dont ils ont besoin.
CBC?
Yeah, your government has spent money on resilient infrastructure. Do events like this indicate you need to be even more aggressive?
Well, obviously, we're getting more severe storms more frequently, whether it was wildfires this past summer, whether it was the terrible flooding in BC just last year. We know there is a need for more resilient infrastructure. There is a need to draw on the lessons that we learned on how to rebuild infrastructure quickly following the BC floods. We know there's lots to do, and of course that is something that this government takes seriously. Building infrastructure that is going to be able to withstand extreme weather events, maybe a one in 100-year storm that tend to start hitting every few years instead of every centuries. We're going to need to continue to be aware of how to invest, how to make our communities more resilient, but also think about how we continue to do our part to fight climate change, because things are only getting worse.
Juste en français là-dessus, s'il vous plaît.
Évidemment, en tant que gouvernement, nous avons eu à répondre à de plus en plus d'événements météorologiques extrêmes au fil des dernières années, que ce soit des canicules, que ce soit des inondations, des feux de forêt ou des ouragans. nous allons être là pour rebâtir en mieux. Nous allons apprendre à créer une infrastructure de plus en plus résiliente parce que c'est ce dont on va avoir besoin. En même temps, évidemment, ça souligne à quel point il faut continuer de lutter contre les changements climatiques parce qu'on est en train de faire face à des événements du siècle à toutes les quelques années et ça va pas ralentir.
Et dernière question de suivi va aller à Annie sur Zoom. Si vous pouviez juste vous identifier, s'il vous plaît. Merci.
Hi there. Thank you for taking our questions. It's Annie Bergeron-Oliver at CTV National News. I'm wondering if you can provide any numbers on how many troops will be deployed to Nova Scotia.
I'm happy to turn it over to Minister Anand for that, but we will respond to whatever requests are made. We have the necessary numbers to be able to respond to whatever is asked for. In regards to Nova Scotia, I'll turn it over to Minister Anand.
Okay, thank you so much, Prime Minister and Annie. We have been planning and making sure that we are ready. And so we have Gagetown as well as other possibilities from reserves and CFB Halifax ready to respond. But as I said, the first priority is for us to complete the reconnaissance, to ensure that we are deploying the right number of troops to the locales that are needed. And we are embedded with the provincial organizations, including with Nova Scotia, to ensure that we are making the best use of the assets that are ready to be deployed, including in the human resource area. So the situation is evolving on a minute-by-minute basis, and we will have more information to share as soon as that recce is done and the troops themselves have been deployed. As I said, they're coming from Gagetown primarily, as well as CFB Halifax and other reserves. And I'll have precise numbers for you in the short term. Thank you.
And Annie, it's Bill Blair, and if I just also might jump in, the Canadian Coast Guard is also, in addition to the excellent response of the Canadian Armed Forces, the Canadian Coast Guard is also present. There are presence already in Port aux Basques, in the Magdalene Islands. This is, in many aspects, a maritime event, and the Canadian Coast Guard is deployed. They have ships, they have helicopters, and they've got personnel. And they're already in the community, and they're already responding. 2 days ago, they stood up their incident management teams, and they've been working very closely with local authorities in order to respond. And I'd even point out that the Coast Guard training facility located in Sydney, Nova Scotia, that community was significantly impacted by the impact of Fiona passing through there. Shelters have been damaged, and the Coast Guard's opened up the doors of their training facility to take people in. And so that response is immediate, it's there, it's in place, and we'll get you numbers on that as soon as they're available.
Thank you very much. And my follow-up is sort of along the same lines. I'm wondering if you can provide some type of insight about what the premiers were asking for in terms of overall assistance from the federal government this morning. So far as I'm aware, only Nova Scotia has officially asked for the military. So what other type of assistance has been requested and can be provided to those provinces who have yet to ask for the military's help?
Again, I'll turn it over to Minister Blair, but the reality is over the past number of days, federal operations centers and resources have been connecting with provincial authorities who have been preparing for this eventuality. So we already have begun to mobilize resources. So if and when requests come in from other provinces, we will be able to rapidly not just say, yes, we'll do it, but and here it is already. So that's the focus that we've taken. It really happens because there is such a seamless cooperation when it comes to these sorts of events across different orders of government, from the local mayors and emergency responders to the provincial authorities to the federal government with its resources being there. But turning over to Blair for continued follow-up. Sorry, Bill, you need to take off mute.
Sorry, sir. I'd also like to turn this over in a moment to Minister LeBlanc, who's also been in direct contact with those very premiers. I have been speaking to each of my ministerial counterparts in all 5 of the impacted provincial governments. I can tell you that, they're well aware of the availability of our help, and we've been engaged with them in those discussions from over several days. There's been strong indication from a number of the provinces that they fully anticipate that they are going to need our help in the debris removal and the recovery. Most of them are without hydro. There is the initial cleanup and assessment of the damage, And then long term, what we've also heard from our provincial counterparts is they're going to need help in the recovery. There's been significant damage to critical infrastructure, to people's homes and businesses, to communities. You know, the wharves in the Maritimes are such an important critical infrastructure for those communities, and many of them have been absolutely pummeled by Fiona. And so we're going to work with them, not just in the immediate, but over the long term to help rebuild and recover in those communities. We know there's a lot of work to do, but we've been reminded that, you know, winter is coming. There's a lot of damage that has taken place, and there's an urgency to our assistance, and we've assured them. Both Minister LeBlanc and I have been able to assure them that we'll be there for them, and that we'll work with them to assist in that recovery as expeditiously as possible. Canadians deserve nothing less from us. Dominic, I'll go over to you.
Bill, thank you. And Prime Minister, Bill said it well. When I spoke to the premiers this morning, they are, as you noted, very aware and very grateful for the seamless interaction between federal authorities in their emergency management organizations. That work has been ongoing in recent days. So they spoke to me about the urgency of providing what supplementary resources we may have around helping restore power in terms of removing debris and trees that have fallen on a number of power lines. There's obviously the sort of emergency search and rescue function that Bill noted with the Canadian Coast Guard and the Armed Forces assets. But they very quickly spoke to me about the need for a long-term support around public and critical infrastructure. Bill said it well. Premier King this morning said that roofs have been torn off schools, community centers, fishing harbors are severely damaged. In my part of New Brunswick, as the Prime Minister knows, the lobster season is on right now. So those fishers have a very immediate need to be able to access their livelihood once the storm passes. So this is exactly the kind of work that will accompany provincial authorities in the coming weeks and months, and we'll do it quickly and expeditiously and stay with them until all of this is done.
Thank you to the Prime Minister and the Ministers for the update. Seeing there are no more questions, this puts an end to the press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci beaucoup et bonne journée.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde.